Alright, so it's been a few years since my first video on How I Met Your Mother, a show near and dear to my heart, both out of sentimental reasons and because it's a sort of ode to storytelling itself as a show. Back then, I compared How I Met Your Mother to the new and utterly disastrous How I Met Your Father series, and I knew I'd want to look at the original series again on its own terms. Now, there's so much to say here, and I know the show isn't perfect, don't get me wrong, but the things that do work incredibly well. I think there are plenty of people out there who acknowledge the show's faults, but still find its overall effect eminently moving, and this video is for you guys. But how to cover a show that does so much both in form and in substance when it comes to storytelling? Well, today we're going to look at a few trademark How I Met Your Mother storytelling maneuvers through the lens of just one episode. One easily overlooked, altogether pretty forgettable episode all the way back in season 1. Honestly, I'd normally skip over this one just to get to some of my personal favorites on a rewatch, which all come later in the series, episodes that hit you with introspective monologues, unexpected emotional vulnerability, dramatic reveals, but all of those big moments are built on basic fundamentals that the show started to establish pretty early on. So when I say textbook episode, I don't mean best overall or my personal favorite, but rather formally exemplary. And in my opinion, despite its faults, How I Met Your Mother is a powerhouse of TV storytelling thanks to its clear sense of purpose, unique approach to fundamentals, and charisma at every level. So it's worth looking at how it got that job done. So without further ado, the textbook episode of the day is Season 1, Episode 16, Cupcake. What's going on here? Well, not a ton. Season 1 largely focuses on Ted and Robin's out-of-sync interest in each other. Here, Ted is 2 months into dating Victoria, the mystery baker woman he met at a friend's wedding. Robin is being kind of a jerk to Victoria since she herself has feelings for Ted that she didn't act on in time. Marshall is prepping for a big interview at the NRDC, while Barney is hoping that the two of them will work together instead that summer, and Lily is in wedding prep mode. As Victoria finds out that she has this huge career opportunity in Germany, she and Ted ponder what to do about their relationship. So, spoilers ahead for the whole show, and this episode in particular, of course, which ends with Ted and Victoria agreeing to try long distance, which was doomed to fail as we know. This video will start with a more detailed episode synopsis before zooming out a bit to look at some of those key storytelling tools on display here, and then looking at some of the character work all held in this short, early, relatively forgettable episode. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe, and if you're already a subscriber, welcome back. And if you're looking for my House of the Dragon Season 2 review, I'm sorry it's not available here anymore. I'm really disappointed, but there's nothing I can do. But you can find that over on Patreon, where members can watch for free, though of course, please do contribute if you can. Now again, Cupcake is a very simple episode, but just a quick walkthrough highlights some key writing attributes that serve the show well overall. We'll look at more specific tools in the next section, but broadly, two main features of How I Met Your Mother story writing are efficiency and causality. And those elements are linked, right? We really only see things that lead to other things. I won't walk through the entire episode beat by beat, but it is crucial to recognize how immediately and clearly the basic stakes and structure of the episode are established. So we start with two moments in Ted and Marshall's apartment. First, narrator Ted tells us everything is going well with Victoria, and we're reminded that it's a relatively new relationship and that she's a professional baker. Their dynamic will, of course, take center stage this episode, so that focus is established right off the bat. Then we see Marshall prepping for his NRDC internship interview. Barney ruins his crappy old suit and offers him a deal with his tailor. That's plot B. We then switch to McLaren's, where Victoria joins Robin and Lily on her way to meet Ted. Victoria offers to take Lily wedding dress shopping since she has industry connections, so less than 3 minutes in, we know the basic structure of the episode. Guys will go suit shopping, girls will go dress shopping. Victoria then steps away to take an unexpected phone call, giving Robin and Lily a chance to talk alone. In this episode, and in the show as a whole, pay attention to when characters leave the table or the room. It's always to make way for a quick dynamic change. Here, Robin and Lily remind us of the emotional conflict underlying the episode. Robin dislikes Victoria because she wants Ted. They'll discuss this again the next time Victoria leaves the two of them alone, and those two beats on their own comprise a mini emotional story for Robin. But the phone call at the bar isn't a random excuse to move Victoria away from the table, it's also the introduction of the episode's focus, as Victoria is accepted to a major baking fellowship in Germany. We don't see Lily's and Robin's reactions right there because they don't matter. We're moving along efficiently. This is a quick-paced sitcom show. At dinner, Ted and Victoria agree that long distance just isn't an option, and that they should each take some time alone to contemplate their relationship in the future, establishing the basic episode question: should Victoria stay or go? Or more specifically, should Ted, our hero, our protagonist, should Ted ask her to stay or lose his girlfriend? We'll come back to this idea of a dilemma, but particularly in these earlier seasons, every episode does revolve around a mini problem that relates back to a broader issue. At the end of this season, season 1, Ted and Robin get together and Marshall and Lily split up. How do we get there? Bit by bit, episode by episode, problem by problem. Not every show has to do this, but as we've been trending towards shorter seasons with longer episodes, there's something both nostalgically compelling and genuinely effective about breaking down broader narratives into quick episodic chunks. Now, the majority of the episode Cupcake features those two shopping scenes, with Ted and Victoria each receiving advice before they each make up their minds and meet up later. With the girls, Lily urges Robin to be more supportive towards Ted, prompting Robin to offer Victoria some heartfelt advice, and the two women connect. Victoria decides to give her relationship with Ted a chance by staying. Lily also destroys a pricey wedding gown and lands a big debt. With the guys, Marshall is lulled into Barney's world of money, but is nonetheless determined to pursue his nonprofit career path. Hearing the guys' advice, Ted decides to let Victoria go. But at dinner, Ted and Victoria each impulsively reverse what they had initially thought. Ted had decided to let her go, but his sentimentality prevails and he asks her to stay. Upon hearing that, Victoria changes her own mind and she responds that she has to go. They break up, but with Marshall's encouragement, Ted pursues one more romantic day with Victoria before she leaves for Germany. Barney is thrilled that someone else is suited up along with him, and it's also revealed that despite promising a hefty discount, the suit was actually super expensive, so along with Lily's dress problem, Marshall is sort of forced to take Barney's job offer. Finally, at the airport, when they're saying goodbye, Ted and Victoria make a last-ditch plan to do long distance after all. So that's the whole episode in broad terms. It's super simple. All the episode had to establish was that Ted and Victoria would do long distance, and that Marshall would take a summer internship at Barney's office. But by pausing to make the characters consider those decisions, this episode makes way for character work and, obviously, comedic entertainment. Everything here is neatly balanced, symmetrical, and carefully placed to maintain focus. The episode focus is Ted and Victoria, and in the back burner we have Marshall's sartorial subplot and Robin's feelings for Ted. The next few episodes will push those issues to the forefront as the season keeps moving along. And as already mentioned, every moment in Cupcake leads to another. For example, in their second one-on-one conversation, Lily reminds Robin that if Robin truly cares about Ted, she should consider that Victoria makes him happy and let them be together. This advice works, and then Robin and Victoria actually bond over the balance between career and love. In this little heartfelt moment, Victoria says that she thinks Robin is super cool. Now, although Victoria does initially decide to stay, she, like Ted, changes her mind instantly when he asks her to. The episode doesn't state this explicitly, but to me, it's her earlier conversation with Robin that inspired her to be more independent. She thinks Robin is super cool, she makes a Robin-like decision. In that sense, we could draw a line all the way from Victoria's decision to Lily telling Robin to be nicer at the beginning of the episode. That might sound sorta convoluted, but it is a major theme of How I Met Your Mother, that there is a butterfly effect to every minor moment of life. And it's absolutely fantastic to see that theory of causality actually reflected in the story writing itself. And in general, it's strong TV writing principle for everything to lead to something else. As the show progresses, episodes do tend to become a little less tight, with subplots occasionally feeling like weird distractions, and people acting out of character just to have something to do, but that's almost inevitable for a 9-season sitcom, and even the least effective episodes execute exciting storytelling maneuvers, many of which are established right in this episode. So we can start with the episode title, Cupcake. The episode starts with a little happy honeymoon phase vignette of baking cupcakes. We see cake again as Lily tries on dresses. And finally, Ted impulsively asks Victoria to stay in New York when she gifts him a cupcake. This detail is the perfect encapsulation of what the show does with objects on a broader scale. How I Met Your Mother regularly imbues random objects with meaning, to the point where people get tattoos of the yellow umbrella or the blue French horn. This storytelling device is distinct from standard symbolism. They're not using pre-configured symbols like a cross or the sun. They're inventing them within the confines of the story world. Now, this works in a few ways. On one level, they're a tool for audience engagement. We see something, we know what it means, we're part of the story. And that's a crucial element of the How I Met Your Mother approach. The show is well known for its long-standing gags, running jokes, repeated vernacular, and in this episode, both Marshall and Lily use the phrase, quote, all talking, no sex, kill me now, to describe long-distance relationships. Now, of course, it's not exactly sci-fi to imagine a couple using the same phrase to describe something, but that exact repetition, that code that these guys all speak, it all builds up an insular story world in which these characters live. And while that example is pretty benign, How I Met Your Mother is of course replete with the impossible, elements of magical realism that bring this story to exaggerated life. As I said in my first video on the show, this isn't the same New York that's home to Carrie Bradshaw or Rachel Green or Jerry Seinfeld. This is a special, heightened, romanticized life. And the reason why this works is the same reason why Cupcake is the episode title here. Remember, this isn't a show about friends. It's a show about memory and storytelling. That opening vignette of Ted and Victoria could have been anything, them at dinner, in bed, hanging out, on a walk, but it was baking cupcakes. Of course, yes, this reminds the audience of her job, which is crucial, but this is how happiness with Victoria is cemented in Ted's brain, both within this episode, as her gift later symbolizes their potential as a couple and prompts his change of mind, but also as narrator, older Ted recounts the story to his children. And certainly, when I look back on my life, there are objects that in and of themselves contain stories, and if I were to communicate those stories to other people, I'd want them not just to know what happened, but to feel the things I felt. And there we have the trademark exaggeration of the show. Because this is a framed story, this is a memory, there's plenty of latitude for the show to be ridiculous, absurd, impossible, magical. This is how adult Ted remembers it. He'll probably always have some sort of Proustian association between cupcakes and Victoria, and for the rest of the show, objects, places, people, events will all have that romanticized exaggeration that we tend to carry in our own memories. And you can look out for use of objects in other writing, TV, film, literature. There's a sort of MFA-related style of writing that amplifies descriptive details and unnecessary recurring objects because they think it automatically brings the story to life just to describe what's in the room. But it can often feel forced, hollow, and distracting. But in contrast, How I Met Your Mother is consistently adept at bringing random objects to life through story and creative significance. Now, this episode is obviously pretty light, but it nonetheless features at least one example of trademark How I Met Your Mother move, which is a sudden tonal shift. It's not drastic, but it's as Ted laments his breakup with Victoria, and Marshall says, "Why'd you break up now? You still have one more day." I mean, this is classic How I Met Your Mother, depicting just 12 hours more like it can absolutely change everything, and it does for these two. Hyper-romantic, exaggerated passion, and Marshall's delivery here is pretty cheesy, but it works. In general, some of the most impactful moments from the show are sudden tonal shifts that catch us off guard. I'm not saying Ted deciding to hang out with Victoria more made me weep or anything, but it was this suddenly sweet and earnest friendship moment that broke through the generally light tone of the episode. These tonal shifts also communicate what we, the audience, should focus on. In this episode, that Marshall has to take an evil job to pay off debt is treated like a joke, but his turmoil later as he balances his ideals with his reality will take center stage and be treated as such. Again, this one might be minor, but every character on the show at one point or another delivers immensely impactful tonal shifts, and they often even use telling a story to do so. And that framed narrative is obviously another key device of How I Met Your Mother. The storytelling tool of the narrator deserves a video of its own, but briefly, even in this episode, older Ted's narration transforms How I Met Your Mother into a reflection on life and a memory, and changes the audience's relationship with the story and characters. This episode ends with Ted and Victoria promising each other that long distance can work, and the narrator cuts in to say, "It didn't, but more on that later." That's a little preview to hook our curiosity, and it also keeps emphasis on how the story unfolds rather than what happens week by week. We know we're leading to something, the mother, and the show increasingly feeds us glimpses of what will happen before we get there, so every moment inherently feels more meaningful because it's been included as part of a means to an end. And though this is a relatively straightforward episode, there is a hint of the show's experimental use of narrative structure through the narrator. The bulk of the episode comprises the parallel shopping scenes, but they don't unfold organically. Instead, we see the guys shopping, we see Ted make up his mind, and then we see him suddenly change course during dinner with Victoria. We then go back in time to see Victoria's side of the story, where we get the dress shopping sequence. This is textbook How I Met Your Mother structuring, wherein the use of the narrator reminds us that we, the audience, are watching a performance of someone's memories rather than a sequence unfolding in live time. And speaking of framed narratives, this episode also features a story within a story to play around with informing the audience. In their two separate shopping scenes, Marshall and Lily both tell a story from Lily's summer abroad program in France. Marshall's story is about a guy named Gabriel whom Marshall had to scare away from Lily, and Lily's is about a girl named Gabrielle who suddenly stopped being her friend. It's very simple humor, right? The story itself really isn't that funny, but what makes it work is that it inherently involves the audience. No one announces the punchline that they're obviously the same person. We piece it together ourselves. Managing information through organized perspective is another trademark How I Met Your Mother tool. Many episodes involve a hierarchy of information wherein it matters who knows what, and part of building suspense is in managing what we, the audience, know as well. In Cupcake, Ted doesn't know that Robin has feelings for him, but we do, and we can imagine that he'll find out soon, which he does. And on that France story, just to highlight how efficient this episode is, telling this story informs us of two crucial things. One, Marshall and Lily have only ever spent one summer apart since they met and it went terribly, and two, Marshall and Lily are both opposed to long distance. It's not like their imminent breakup doesn't make sense without this story, but rather that every detail of backstory, every humor point is expository in one way or another. But the final storytelling device I want to highlight here is, I think, the most effective, and that's the use of the dilemma. Presenting Ted with a major decision, should I ask Victoria to stay or should I let her go, is a really smart baseline for this episode. Right off the bat, giving Ted and Victoria a dilemma to stew over provides the episode with a consistent dialogue backbone. They each wonder things aloud and receive advice from their friends, and this is a classic build for the show. Many, if not most episodes, revolve around the friend group hanging out and telling each other about their day, getting advice, arguing over random crap, which provides a baseline for flashbacks and telling stories, so even when the plots are fantastical or contrived, they feel organic since they're framed by conversation, banter, and regularity. And for all its fantastical elements, How I Met Your Mother does a solid job of communicating that feeling of being lost in your late 20s and early 30s. Everyone's at different stages. Your choices really do shape your career, your love life, your geography, your friendships. And, of course, as narrator Ted looks back on his life in this story, it stands to reason that every crossroad, big or small, feels retrospectively definitive and immense. Now, obviously, we do make big decisions from time to time, but most of life is just spent living it on a day-to-day. How I Met Your Mother, though, dramatizes the feeling of early adulthood into dramatic dilemmas, heating Ted's life up so we can feel it too. Should Ted ask Victoria to stay? Simple, clear, dramatically compelling. It's a personal story about Ted and his girlfriend, but it's also representative of what we all navigate in less dramatically obvious terms. Finally, it's the decisions that characters make that tell us who they are far more than anything else. And a good story is often simply a character facing the consequences of their own decision. Ted's choice here, first to be mature and respectful and let Victoria go, and then to impulsively ask her to stay, kind of tells us everything we need to know about this guy at this point. He's good in the sense that he means well and thinks about other people, but he's also sort of selfish and unduly quixotic. He both overthinks and underthinks at the same time, and that's all communicated through his decision-making under this particular dilemma. These storytelling tools, objects, narration, exaggeration, perspective, dilemmas, all heighten How I Met Your Mother from just guy dates many women to dramatically stirring comedy, and that takes us right to character work. We really can glean quite a bit about each character from this episode alone. In lesser shows, characters might have different attributes, but they all kind of feel the same. Here, even though they bounce along the same story rhythm, each character feels distinctive and personable. How I Met Your Mother links ostensibly surface-level characterization with long-term development arcs. And again, when you look at some other shows, you'll notice they often throw in random attributes like hobbies and quirks that don't really go anywhere or mean anything. But episodes like Cupcake use every moment to communicate character depth and build towards long-term payoff. And to be clear, this is within the confines of sitcom writing. I'm not saying the work here is monumentally deep, but it is certainly effective and purposeful. So, starting with Marshall, in every line this episode, Marshall is sweet, playful, supportive, strong-hearted, and maybe a bit naive. His sense of right and wrong is present in both his professional and personal life, and we can see how deeply he cares about his friends and fiancé. I think he's easily the most underrated character on the show, and in the very next episode he gets his dues as we see him actually start the job he's tricked into here. But Cupcake is a necessary first step in Marshall's series-long struggle between his ethical ideals and his economic goals. So even with Marshall just serving as a subplot behind Ted in this episode, quietly, major developments are moving along. Lily involves herself in her friends' lives by sort of coaching Robin to let Ted be happy with Victoria. Here it seems pretty benign, but we'll later see that she crosses the line with her involvement in problematic ways. We also have some gentle foreshadowing here that Lily has never really spent time away from Marshall in a meaningful way as an adult, an issue that informs her character not just when she leaves Marshall briefly at the end of the season, but throughout the entire show as she struggles to be herself amidst living for other people. Robin doesn't get a ton of focus this episode, but with Lily's guidance, she does make the decision to let Ted be happy with Victoria, and in so doing, she's pretty vulnerable with Victoria. She says how her constant prioritizing of career over love has led to a lot of lonely nights, and maybe it's okay to let yourself be happy with the right person. And as she's saying that, we gotta remember that the only reason Ted even met Victoria was because Robin got an amazing work opportunity, couldn't make the wedding, and lost her chance with Ted. And this brief flash of Robin's inner vulnerabilities has immense payoff throughout the series as she and Ted have conflicting visions for life. And in one episode in particular, the season 5 finale, when she chooses love over career and gets screwed over, it all sort of comes to a head.
5 years ago, you never would have chosen love over your career, but today, you did.
It looks like I'm getting dumber.
No, just more courageous.
That season 5 ending rounds out this major tension in Robin's life, and I do think the writers were a bit lost with what to do with her afterwards. Don't get me wrong, I still like her, and we get a beautiful love story with Barney alongside painful reconciliations with Ted. In this episode, though, she plays the perfect supporting role, and we can see the inevitable conflict to come. With Victoria physically out of the picture, Robin's interest in Ted will be even harder to ignore. And then there's Barney. In Cupcake, Barney physically and tactically manipulates Marshall into debt, forcing Marshall to take Barney's job offer. This is obviously classic puppeteer Barney at work. Not unlike Lily, he often influences or outright controls the friend group so he can get his way. But in almost an inverse to Lily, who seems well-intended but is often quietly self-centered, his selfishness in these episodes provides an assumptive baseline for his character that can then be defied when he does something selfless, indicating inner complexity. In the next season, it's thanks to him that Marshall and Lily get back together. Moreover, as the series progresses, Barney's need to have friends around him unfolds as a manifestation of his biggest vulnerabilities, and these memorable moments of later seasons only work emotionally because they're built on this kind of early groundwork. And since the show's ending, we've seen plenty of articles and reviews like 10 worst things Ted Mosby ever did, or here's why Ted isn't really a hero. But look, he's not the hero of this show because he's some ideal to aspire to. He's the hero of this show because he fights for a certain ideal and fails over and over. And yeah, he hurts plenty of people along the way. He can be super frustrating to watch, and sometimes older narrator Ted acknowledges this himself. Sometimes a friend, usually Marshall, gives Ted some heat in the moment. And though Ted doesn't always learn from his mistakes always have narrative consequences. Not long after this episode, Ted loses Victoria and Robin in one fell swoop, but this is how the story has to start. In this episode alone, we see him wrestle with rationality. In his head, he knows he shouldn't ask Victoria to give up a career opportunity, but with impulse, his gut here gears him towards a rushed happy ending. And throughout the show, we'll see that impulse stay unrelenting against waves and waves of cynicism and loss that make Ted feel like he's further and further from finding happiness when they're actually carrying him closer to the mother as he very gradually learns from his mistakes. I think this idea of the audience realizing that Ted sucks comes from the contrast between his professed good intentions and big dreams versus the actions he takes. But that disparity is pivotal to early Ted. His idealism being both beautiful in theory and sometimes harmful in effect is kind of the heart of the series early on here. As he tries to reconcile who he is with who he wants to be, his choices, like the one he makes here, represent a long arc towards becoming the person he needs to be before he's really ready to meet Tracy. So, all in all, this episode provides a snapshot of major development through lines for each of the core characters. We get Lily involving herself in Ted's love life, Marshall's ethical career dilemmas, Barney's need to make life legendary, Robin's fierce independence masking quiet uncertainty, and Ted's hurried idealism getting in his own way. And all of this character work is conveyed through throwaway dialogue lines and quick humor moments. The show's beat-by-beat tone is light, particularly in this episode, right? We have an episodic mini-plot of Ted and Victoria's dilemma to focus on, so unless you're really looking for it, you might not even notice that they're building towards something bigger through even the supporting characters. Overall, How I Met Your Mother is remarkably adept at balancing the recurring nature of sitcoms, the girl of the week, the bar incident of the week, the career crap of the week, with broader arcs of development for each of the main 5 leads. When I think about why How I Met Your Mother works, why it had such lasting cultural impact, why it felt so definitive and significant when we watched it back in high school, one obvious element is the charisma of the main cast, but the other is that the show has heart. Much like Ted himself, even when there are missteps or weaker moments, the plain earnestness of intention and clarity of artistic identity keeps this show going. I think the moments of emotional clarity in this show, those tonal shifts I mentioned earlier, really speak to people because they emphasize the lonely hardships intrinsic to just living life as a young adult. The cartoonish exaggerations can be a mixed bag, some work better than others, but they all serve to dramatize very real and relatable feelings. These characters can feel fun and relaxed, but they can also feel painfully poignant and dramatically stirring, and none of that works without organized, efficient, and clear storytelling tools. How I Met Your Mother didn't reinvent the sitcom wheel, it just took its own premise seriously. This is a guy telling a story about his own life. So how would that look? Well, there would be exaggerations, confused timelines, self-corrections, the impossible would be possible, everything would feel magical and important and causal and real. There's still more to say about this show at large, but hopefully this one episode deep dive was a worthwhile exploration of some of the textbook tools at work behind the curtain of How I Met Your Mother. As always, thanks so much for watching, and do comment with other shows that you'd like this channel to cover. Also, please do subscribe and check out my new Patreon page. Thanks, guys.